Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. Hello and welcome back to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I am very excited for today's episode. Honestly, maybe excited isn't even the right word. I think I'm just very proud of this episode. This is a topic that, I'll be honest, I've kind of put off for some time. And that's because I didn't quite understand it. And so, somebody requested it. And so I put in the research and now I feel very confident about what it is. And I'm excited to tell you. What we're talking about today is carbonic maceration. If you've ever heard, this is it's very buzzword right now. I feel like a lot of wineries and a lot of wines are being made in this style. And a lot of times, it's being said oh, this is our carbonic Sangiovese. This is our carbonic Gamay. And you just kind of look and you're like, what do you mean by that? What is that? And you might hear carbonic and think carbonated. No, it doesn't have bubbles. That's not what it refers to. So what the heck does it mean? It just sounds like this super geeky term when really it's making these really approachable porch pounder style wines and the things just don't mesh. Well, after this episode, I am confident that you will know at least a little bit more about carbonic maceration. You might have to listen twice, and I may repeat myself a little bit because it's one of those things that just it's simple once you hear it enough, but it can be overwhelming. Hopefully that makes sense. Anyway, enough blathering, blah, 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 blah. Let's get into this episode. Okay, so carbonic maceration. Let's talk about what is it? Carbonic maceration is a winemaking technique. And honestly, it's as ancient as winemaking itself. It's simply a way of making wine. Anyone can do it as long as you have the equipment. But it is most commonly tied to the region of Beaujolais in France. And we'll talk more about this later, but I want to talk about what it is first before we dive into the history and all that. Carbonic maceration is also known as Carbo, C-A-R-B-O in France, or Cabmac in Australia. It does not refer to bubbles. I know you hear the word carbonic in it, right? And that sounds like carbonated, but that carbonic in the name refers to the fact that carbon dioxide is used to make the wine, but the resulting wine is not carbonated. All right? So all of that can just mean it's not carbonated, no bubbles. This style is typically applied to lighter to medium-bodied red wines. It can be used with white wines, but the result would be actually an orange wine because it has to use the skins of the grapes. And it would be super phenolic, tannic, and really funky, earthy and less fruity. I am going to recommend one white wine that I found. I have not tried it, but it seems like it's by a good producer, and I'd be kind of curious to see what it's like. So maybe by the time this episode comes out, I will have tried it. Who knows? And carbonic maceration tends to lower acidity in the wines, which many white wines rely on that for good balance and flavor. So in general, carbonic maceration is going to be applied to red wines. Just a quick reminder, if you are not on my mailing list yet, what are you waiting for? I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Now, let's get back to the show. Now, why do winemakers choose to use this style? And again, I promise I'm going to get to how it works in just a second, but I feel like this kind of gives you an idea of what type of wine is made when they use this style. So winemakers will do this to create a light-bodied, easy drinking, very perfumed, fruity wine that is meant to be drunk young. Like essentially a porch pounder, or what people in the wine world call glue glue. Like it's just meant to be drank. It's lighter colored, lower acidity, not a lot of tannin. You also get a lot of these candied fruit aromas, things like watermelon Jolly Rancher, strawberry sunburst, mango high chew. And now these are aromas, okay? So this style does not make a sweet wine. It does not create like more sugar in the wine. It just creates these candied fruit aromas. This style is also very embraced by the natural leaning winemakers because it is a very natural way of making wine. It's kind of one of those where like you do something, you let it go, you forget about it, it does its thing. And honestly, as much as like carbonic maceration might sound intimidating, it does make wine more fun and approachable because it's low tannin, so you don't get that like drying sensation in your mouth. It's lower acidity, so it's not like, like a razor blade to the tongue. And it's nice and fresh and fruity, and you can chill these red wines a little bit, and you can have them just out on the porch with your friends, and that's the kind of wine it makes. Other reasons that winemakers might choose to do carbonic maceration is that it helps decrease naturally high levels of malic acid, which is the natural acid in grapes, kind of like the acid you'd get from a green apple. So it tends to produce softer wines. It also decreases the tannins, right? So again, softer wines. It can create a blending component. So maybe they only do it with a portion of the grapes and then they do natural or normal fermentation with the others. So then they have a little blending situation going on. And then it adds those aromas. Remember, those kind of candied fruit aromas. This is really great for varietals or grapes that don't have a lot of natural aroma to them. Though the flip side of this, and that I think is important to know, is that it can override the natural fruit character in the grape. So if you have a grape that's known for a certain, flavor or aroma, and you use carbonic maceration, you might lose that aroma, and instead it's going to create those ones that I was talking about, those kind of candied fruit aromas. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, right? That's just good to keep in mind. Okay, so now that we know carbonic maceration, the type of wine that it's going to make something that's light and fresh and fruity, and it's usually a red wine. Let's talk about how the winemaker does this. Now, before we get into how carbonic maceration works, let's talk about normal fermentation. So regular making wine, if you've been listening to this podcast, this is just going to be repetition, but if you're new here, let me tell you about it. Generally, when we're making wine, you're going to go pick the grapes. They're going to get destemmed. So they're just going to be taken off the stems, and then you're going to crush them. And again, we're talking about red wine here. So we pick the grapes, destem, we crush. Then that like crushed juice and skin and, all of that of the grapes, you're going to add yeast to it. Or there's yeast that exists on the outside of the grape skin. And what that yeast does is it eats the natural sugar in the grapes. When it eats the sugar, it produces alcohol and carbon dioxide, which that'll come up in a second. Just hold on to that. But basically, that's how we get grape juice to wine. The yeast eats sugar, produces alcohol and carbon dioxide, right? This is our normal fermentation. Carbonic maceration, that initial fermentation, the initial creation of alcohol is not caused by yeast. Okay, this is the big difference. The other thing is that it happens inside the grape itself. Like, how cool is that? You don't crush the grapes, you actually keep the grapes whole, and this initial ferment happens inside the grape. It's intracellularly, the fancy word. It occurs intercellularly. And so basically, in order to make this happen, winemakers will take intact berries. So remember, we're not crushing them. We're just going to take them. We're going to pick them. They might destem them. They might not. But they're going to be whole grapes. And they put them into a vessel, usually like a tank. That's kind of what I'm picturing in my head. And they have no oxygen in the tank. And so in order to create that environment, they put the grapes in the tank. They seal it. And they add carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide removes all the oxygen. And then what happens is that carbon dioxide breaks down the sugar and the malic acid, remember the natural acid in the grape, from within the grape itself. So the carbon dioxide breaks down sugar and malic acid, and it produces alcohol. Like, how cool is that? also a range of compounds that affect the wine's final flavor. And I'll actually talk about what those specific compounds are in a little bit, but then we'll be getting too much in the weeds. So let's focus on this first. We have our sealed vessel, we've got our full, non-crushed grapes, and we've got carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide now has broken down the sugar and that malic acid in the grape, and it's producing alcohol and different flavors. Then the polyphenols in the grape, which is essentially the tannins and anthocyanins that exist on the grape skin, go into the pulp, into the juice of the grape, and it causes that white flesh of the grape to turn pink. Now, once the alcohol percentage reaches 2%, so we're not getting very high in this, 2%, the grapes burst. There's too much happening inside the grape, and so it bursts. And then at that point, normal fermentation will finish the job. All right, so it's honestly simpler. I don't know why I kept putting this off and was so intimidated by it. It's really, really simple. In order to do carbonic maceration, you have the full grapes. You put them inside a tank. You seal that tank. You add carbon dioxide so it removes all the oxygen. And then the first fermentation will occur inside the grape, and it'll be caused by the carbon dioxide, not yeast. And then it produces all these really funky, unique flavors. Now, remember I told you I was going to tell you what those flavors exactly were and what those compounds were? All right, we're going to dive into the science. We're going to get a little geeky here real quick. So, the compounds that are created and the aromas associated with them include benzaldehyde. This creates aromas of cherry, kirsch, or almond. You get vinyl benzene, which actually creates this kind of plasticky aroma, which is where you get that candied fruit flavor, right? It's not just fresh fruit, it's candied. It actually comes from this plasticky kind of flavor or plasticky kind of aroma. It also produces ethyl cinnamate, which has aromas of cinnamon, strawberry, or honey. Ethyl and methyl vanillate, which, surprise, surprise, that creates the aroma of vanilla. Ethyl 9-decanate. This creates this sweet, kind of fruity, again, a little bit of that candied fruit situation. And 1-octanol, which is an almond buttery aroma. Now, this style of winemaking was first documented by Louis Pasteur in 1872. Yes, the guy behind pasteurization. Makes sense, huh? He was also really big into winemaking. He's a scientist, and winemaking involves a lot of science. And he would advise winemakers on the science of wine and help when issues arose. And he noticed that grapes kept in carbon dioxide tasted different than those kept in normal conditions. Now, they didn't really do much with this at that point. The guy that's actually credited with discovering true carbonic maceration is a French scientist named Michel Flanzy. He used carbon dioxide to preserve grapes and realized that it caused a reaction in the grapes themselves. So Pasteur, he noticed the wines tasted different. He knew something was going on, but Flanzy was the one who actually realized that the reaction happened in the grapes themselves. The style of winemaking, though, wouldn't really start to gain traction until the 1960s. At this time, there's a negociant and chemist, Jules Chauvet. He's also credited as being the grandfather of natural wine for many people. So this Jules Chauvet, he made great strides in semi-carbonic maceration. And I'm going to get to that at the end of this episode, don't worry. But just know that it's very, very similar to carbonic maceration. But he did this with the Gamay grape that was grown in the granite soils of Beaujolais in France. Remember at the beginning of this episode, I said carbonic maceration is often tied to Beaujolais? This is why, because this guy, Chauvet, he started making this style of wine from the Gamay grapes in Beaujolais. Following this, in the 1970s, you had 4 winemakers, Marcel Lapierre, Jean Folliard, Jean-Paul Sévenet, and Guy Breton. You'll actually hear these names come up later in the wines that I recommend for you. But these 4 winemakers were commonly known as the Gang of Four, and they began using carbonic maceration in their winemaking to create lighter wines. But even then, this style of wine wasn't popularized in Beaujolais until Georges Duboeuf began popularizing the famous Beaujolais Nouveau. If you've not had Beaujolais Nouveau, this is the wine made from Gamay in Beaujolais. It uses carbonic maceration or semi-carbonic and it's sold just weeks after it's fermented. So it's typically available in the US around Thanksgiving time. And it's very popular for this like bubblegum banana flavor, which is very common with the carbonic style. And so a lot of people associate carbonic maceration with Beaujolais because of just how popular it was. And like these flavors, they first discovered them in this Beaujolais Nouveau. So they thought it had to do with that region and that grape. But really, it's the style of winemaking. So since the success of this style in Beaujolais, more winemakers around the world have been using it. And so they can create those flavors as well by using this style of winemaking. And what's interesting is some winemakers in Beaujolais have actually gone back to the regular fermentation style, claiming that carbonic maceration is a post-industrial invention and doesn't express terroir. Which honestly, I kind of agree with them. It doesn't really express the sense of place. Remember how I talked about it kind of masks or overwhelms the natural flavors of the grapes and instead produces those flavors that are common with carbonic maceration. And so I think while that style of winemaking is tied to this region, if they want to get the flavors of Beaujolais, you might not want to use, or at least not use full carbonic maceration. Now, even if this is the case, if it's this post-industrial invention, blah, 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 this style is now embraced by many natural-leaning winemakers because it creates this really easy drinking glue. It's wines that are meant to be, and when I say glue, I should say that it's glou. I'm not saying glue. Like, there's a reason behind it. I think it has something to do with the French language, I'm pretty sure. But glue just kind of means like porch pounder, honestly. And it creates these really nice wines that are meant to be consumed young. And again, they can be made without a lot of intervention. You just kind of like set it up and let it go. Now, I'll share some wines to try at the end of this episode, so keep listening in. Wait, I know you think this is an ad, but it's not, so don't hit skip. I have a small favor to ask. Here's the truth. I will never charge you to listen to this show, but every episode takes time and money to create. So if this podcast has helped you pick a better bottle, learn something new, or just kept you company, would you consider becoming a paid subscriber? You can show your support for just $3, $5, $8, or $10 a month. To say thanks, every single supporter gets a shout out on the next episode I record. And if you choose the $10 tier, you actually get to pick a future episode topic. Setting up a subscription is a great way to show your love for the show. Just click the link in the description right now. Thank you for listening, supporting, and being part of my wine-loving community. Now let's get back to the show. Super quick, let's cover some similar styles to carbonic maceration, because I think this is where I was getting a little lost and a little overwhelmed. There is a difference between carbonic and semi-carbonic maceration, though many winemakers will still use a semi-carbonic winemaking process and call it carbonic maceration. The biggest difference, so remember, carbonic maceration, you have the full grapes, you're not crushing them, they're full grapes. You put them in a tank, you seal it, you add carbon dioxide, right? The main difference with semi-carbonic is that you put those whole grapes in the tank, but you don't add carbon dioxide. And instead, you almost let the grapes themselves create the environment. So here's what happens, and this is what's really cool. The grapes at the bottom of that tank are crushed by the weight of all the grapes above them. So they're crushed, they create juice. That juice combines with the yeast on the skins of those grapes, and it goes through a regular fermentation. Now remember, regular fermentation is sugar plus yeast, so that yeast eats all the sugar, and it produces alcohol and carbon dioxide. What do you think that carbon dioxide does now, right? So the carbon dioxide travels up, the grapes in the middle and the top of the tank remain intact, they don't get crushed, and they go through the true carbonic maceration with that CO2 that was created from the grapes at the bottom. How cool is that? Now, semi-carbonic maceration in this style will create less distinctive flavors than a full carbonic maceration, but it'll still produce some of those funky flavors. Now, you may also hear the term whole cluster winemaking. I know for me, this was one where I was like, okay, isn't that the same thing as carbonic? We're taking the whole cluster, meaning like the grapes and, like if you were to just go pick it off the vine and then, do something with it. That sounds a lot like carbonic, doesn't it? It's not quite the same thing. Carbonic maceration is a type of whole cluster winemaking, but it's a specific type. Basically, whole cluster winemaking refers to throwing the entire grape bunch into a vat for winemaking. You essentially skip the destemming process. You might leave the grapes whole, you might crush them. The vat where the fermentation happens might be open, might be closed. If the grapes are whole and the vat is closed, carbonic maceration might happen, or more specifically, semi-carbonic maceration might happen. Remember, because we're not adding the CO2. But whole cluster simply means what it sounds like. The entire grape cluster is added to the fermentation vat to make the wine, stems and all. Carbonic maceration, remember, happens specifically in a sealed vessel, no oxygen, with whole grapes, no juice, and added carbon dioxide. Hopefully that kind of clears it up for you on what carbonic maceration is and how it differs from semi-carbonic and whole cluster. Now let's talk about a few wines that you should try. Starting off, some famous or popular Beaujolais wines to try. So again, these are the grapes made with Gamay from the Beaujolais region of France. Now, again, remember the gang of four, those four French names I said earlier? They still have wineries that are making these semi-carbonic styles of Beaujolais today. So, and a lot of them are popular for their Morgon. This is a region in Beaujolais. So think about it where it just kind of gets like deeper and deeper. So Morgon is a region in Beaujolais, which is a region in France. So if you look for Jean Foillard, Marcel Lapierre, Guy Breton, or Jean-Paul Sévenet, Morgon, all of these will have that nice semi-carbonic style. I'm going to drop all these in the show notes as well, because if you're like, I do not know what you're saying. Also, I might not be pronouncing each of these totally correctly. I do not speak any French, so it's just a guess up here. Some other ones to try: Bernard Diochon, Moyonna Vent Vies Vines, which basically just means old vines. Nicole Chanorion, Côte de Rouy. And of course, the Georges Duboeuf Beaujolais Nouveau. Look for that around Thanksgiving time. Outside of Beaujolais, there are many winemakers using this style. And what I'm most familiar with are Washington winemakers using this style. So I have some recommendations from here in Washington. Lata Wines, they make a carbonic Syrah, which is actually labeled with their second label, Lucius Wine. So Lucius. Their 2023 Lucius Wines Carbonic Syrah is available right now on their website. Core Cellars, COR, has a carbonic Primitivo. Might be sold out, but you might be able to find it in some wine shops around the area. This comes out of the Columbia Gorge. Devium Wines, Devium, they have a Dolcetto that uses carbonic maceration. And then Sagrat, who the winemaker will actually be on a future episode coming up here, has a carbonic Nebbiolo that they do in collaboration with Sonder. It's the wine, if you've ever seen it, it has a cat eating a watermelon. So I've heard it called the watermelon cat wine. So if you've ever seen that in a wine shop, that is carbonic maceration at work. There's also some really good ones out of California. Just to name a couple, Terra Wine Co. has a carbonic Sangiovese. Las Jaras, Jaras, has a wine that's actually called Glu Glu, like Glou. And the exact blend of this changes from vintage to vintage, but it typically combines Zinfandel, Carignan, Petit Syrah, and again, uses the carbonic maceration style. A few others just from all around the world. We have the Grand Moraine Flavorscape Gamay Noir coming out of Oregon. Nyaport has a not cool called Drink Me. This red is a Portuguese blend that uses semi-carbonic maceration. Then, remember I told you there was going to be a white one that I'd recommend. This is not that I recommend, but that I found, and I think you should try if you get a chance. It's just because it's like fun to think about this style being used with white wine, and that's not very common. This is the one that comes out of Armenia. It is Gevorkian Arets Kanguan Carbonic Karasi. So it is a dry, natural white wine made by the Gevorkian winery using the indigenous Kanguan grape. It stands out because it combines carbonic maceration and aging in the traditional Armenian karases, which are these large clay amphorae. You can find that wine on winesofarmenia.com. Now, of course, there are many more, and I highly recommend heading to a small wine shop, asking if they have any wines made with carbonic maceration, and just going from there. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm super proud of this one, so it would mean a lot to me if you enjoyed it too. Let me know. Did you learn something? I really hope I was able to break down this kind of complicated term and make it much more approachable for you. Of course, if you would like to show your support, please rate this podcast, leave a review, share it with a friend. And if you want to show additional support, you can become a paid subscriber. You can click the link in the show notes and become a monthly supporter for $10 or less a month. You'll get a shout out in the next episode, no matter which option you choose. Well, the next episode I record. Plus, if you choose the $10 a month option, you get to choose a topic for a future episode. In next week's episode, I will be diving into the Columbia Gorge region. I took a trip there earlier this year, and I figured it deserved a full episode on the podcast. We're going to talk about visiting, talking about the history of the region, all that good stuff. Thanks again for listening, and if you want to learn more about wine, come follow me at Cork and Fizz on Instagram. Cheers!